Hi, biology. This is Miss Satterley. So I'm going to go over the chemistry of life notes that I had you guys take next week before I do the larger homework assignment and then the quiz on it. Okay, so chemistry of life. I'm going to start off with the atom. The atom is the smallest unit of matter, and it consists of two parts, the electron cloud and the nucleus. The electron cloud is where the electrons are located, and then the nucleus is going to be the center of the atom. So I have a picture, or I actually made this on a PowerPoint. So this is your electron cloud, and the electrons are out here, and then your nucleus is in the center, and you have protons and neutrons in the center. This would actually be a very basic model of the helium atom because we have two protons. So inside your atom, you have subatomic particles. Subatomic particles are particles that are found inside the atom. You have three different types: electrons, neutrons, and protons. They are color-coded. The electrons are out here. Neutrons are the yellow, and then protons are the pink. Here are some general facts about subatomic particles. So the location: electrons are in the electron cloud, protons are in the nucleus, neutrons are in the nucleus. Charge: electrons are negative, protons are positive, and neutrons are neutral. So positive and protons both start with a P, and neutral and neutrons both start with an N. Electrons, you have to remember. So electricity, if you get struck by lightning, is bad. So that's a way you could remember that. Now the mass, I have 1 over 20,000 for electrons. I'm just trying to show you that electrons are really teeny tiny. Protons and neutrons are both given the value of 1. So what keeps an atom together? Attraction between the positive nucleus and the negative electrons is what keeps the atom together. So this is a picture of opposites are going to attract. So a positive and negative attract to each other. Two positives repel and two negatives repel. So that's how the forces of positive and negative work. Okay, moving on to something different. We're going to talk about elements very briefly. Elements are substances that cannot be broken down by ordinary chemical reactions. We have a periodic table that has all of the different elements known. There's 118. 92 of those elements are actually naturally occurring elements. Uranium is the largest one. Anything above that has been man-made. And there are up to 118 elements now that have all been officially named. This is a picture of mercury. Mercury is unique. It's actually liquid at room temperature. There's only two elements that are liquid at room temperature. That includes mercury and bromine. And bromine is a halogen that is a reddish-brown liquid that's very toxic. Mercury is toxic as well. Okay, so that's elements. Now, I also have another video that goes with this that I write out and explain the atom and then the parts of the periodic table. So you need to watch that as well. But I'm going to go through it here. On the periodic table, you have this section right here. So we have a top number. That's called your atomic number. And the atomic number is the number of protons in that element. Next one is the chemical symbol. Chemical symbols can be one or two letters, usually named after English or Latin names. C is for carbon, and that's an example of an English version. And then gold is AU, and that's because it's actually named after the Latin term aurum. When you write chemical symbols, the first letter is always capitalized and the second letter is always lowercase. You cannot write a capital C and a capital U for copper. It has to be capital C and lowercase u. Now, that doesn't match because copper actually goes with cuprum, which is the Latin version for that. Okay, so if I'm looking at my piece of the periodic table here, the chemical symbol is found in the center. And again, it's either one or two letters. The last piece of this is the atomic mass. The atomic mass is the average number of isotopes found in nature. I think I worded it a little different in the other video, but it's the same thing. And that is isotopes are elements that have a different number of neutrons. Now, it's important that you understand that, which I have right here. So an isotope is a form of an element that has a different number of neutrons. An example is carbon-14 compared to carbon-12. Carbon-14 is going to have 6 protons, but it has 8 neutrons, which makes it different. Now the little picture here that I have, it's the 3 different isotopes of hydrogen: protium, deuterium, and tritium. And they all have a different number of neutrons. So the first one is actually lacking a neutron, and that would be just your regular proton. It's very useful in chemical reactions, especially in the body. You have protons and neutrons, and then 1 and 1, and then 1 and 2. Mass number. Mass number is the number of protons and neutrons in an element. So carbon-14, this little picture here, the number that's at the top is always going to be the mass number. The number at the bottom, if it's visible, is going to be the atomic number. So you take the mass number minus the atomic number to figure out how many neutrons you have, to see if you have an isotope or if it's just a regular element. So carbon-14, A would be 14. Carbon has an atomic number of 6, so Z would be 6. 14 minus 6 is 8, so you know it's an isotope because it has 2 extra neutrons. Okay, next thing, compounds. A compound is a group of atoms held together by chemical bonds, and it's represented by chemical formulas. The picture here is CO2. CO2 is something we're going to see several times throughout the semester and next semester. It's carbon dioxide. It is a byproduct of cellular respiration. It is a key ingredient for photosynthesis. So it's very important that you understand what CO2 means. Now, what that formula actually is showing you is that that compound has 1 carbon with 2 oxygen, which is where you get the O2. Chemical bonds. There are 3 major types of chemical bonds. There's also metallic bonds, but we're not going to talk about those in biology because that's more of inorganic chemistry and it doesn't deal with living things. So a chemical bond is a force that links atoms of compounds together, and there are 3 types: covalent, ionic, and hydrogen. A covalent bond is when you share electrons. Ionic bonds are actually when ions form, which are charged particles, and they either give up or gain electrons and then are joined together. Or a hydrogen bond is our weakest bond of the 3, and it actually is a bond between different molecules. So covalent bond, when 2 atoms share electrons. So in the picture here, you can see that those 2 electron clouds are overlapping, and that's because those 2 electrons are actually being shared between the 2 atoms, so they both are happy. They're going to hold together most biological molecules. So most things that we will hear about in this class the rest of the year will have covalent bonds. There are 2 types of covalent bonds. First is a polar covalent bond, and the next one is a nonpolar covalent bond. A polar covalent bond is when there's an unequal sharing of electrons, which means you end up with a partial negative and a partial positive end. Now, a nonpolar covalent bond is when there's an equal sharing of electrons. An example of this would be oil is going to have nonpolar bonds. They're going to have those nonpolar bonds so they don't stick together. We're going to talk about water next week, and I'm going to do a couple little demonstrations where I'm going to show you the properties of water, and we're going to see the polar covalent properties of it in those little experiments. So a molecule is a group of atoms that's held together by a covalent bond. So water is a type of molecule, and it's actually a polar molecule, which is our last slide. But before we get to that, I want to talk about electron configurations. So electron configurations is how the electrons are arranged around the atom, so the electron clouds. A noble gas is our last family on the periodic table. Noble gases actually have a full outer orbital, which is the last electron cloud that has electrons in it. And those are very stable. They will not form bonds because they're happy with the way they are. A full outer ring means you have a stable atom that has a low reactivity. So if I look at this, all of these are examples of noble gases. The first ring can only hold 2 electrons, so helium is happy with 2. And then after that, they're going to hold 8. So neon has an atomic number of 10, which means it's 2 in the first ring and 8 in the second. And then argon is going to have an atomic number of 18, which it has 2, 8, and then 8. Key properties of covalent bonds. Covalent bonds are very strong and very directional. Now, the directional part is important because it will help form bonds in one or more special directions. and that allows different biological molecules to build certain ways. So those are both important properties of covalent bonds. Now, our next type of bond is an ionic bond. Ionic bonds are bonds that are shared between charged particles, which we call ions. So in the picture here, we have an example of lithium and fluoride that are joining together. Now, lithium has one electron in its outer shell, and it wants to get rid of that because once that electron's gone, it's going to have two, and it's going to have a full outer shell. So lithium wants to get rid of it, so it becomes a cation. Now, fluorine, if you see in the picture, it's missing one, so it only has 7, but it really wants to have 8. So it's actually going to steal that electron from lithium to have 8, and it's going to end up becoming what we call an anion, which is a negative. So now we have a positive lithium and we have a negative fluorine. And the reason they're going to join together is because the positive and negatives are going to attract to one another. And that's how an ionic bond works. It's a force of attraction between a positive and a negative ion. But the thing with ionic bonds are actually very weak, and they will break apart when placed in water. And that's because the polar properties of water are stronger than the ionic bond forces. So when you put salt, which is a type of ionic bond, into water, it's going to break apart. So I'm just going to briefly go over how the transfer of electron works. I just verbally mentioned it in the last one, but this is going to give us a little visual. So I'm going to use sodium chloride as my example. So sodium needs to lose one electron to become stable, and chlorine wants to gain one electron to become stable. So it's missing that one spot. So sodium will give up one electron to chlorine, and chlorine is very happy to take on that electron that it needs. After this happens, you form ions. Now, both ions have a full outer ring, which makes them stable. Oh, my electrons are kind of thrown off on that. Oops. Those electrons should be right around that chlorine item still, or ion. So over here, sodium is now positive, and down at the bottom, sodium becomes a positive cation. And then over here we have chlorine, or chloride. When you have an anion, you actually drop the ending and add IDE at the end. So chlorine becomes a negative anion, or chloride. Now, what an ion is. An ion is a charged particle, or another way to say this, it's a particle that has either lost or gained an electron. There's an unequal number of protons and electrons now, which is causing either a positive or negative. So again, I just mentioned this. You have cations and anions. A way to remember that cations are positive is cats have paws, positive. A cation has lost an electron, which makes it positive because now it has one more proton than electron, which means that proton's positive charge is going to be throwing it off balance. So now you have cations that are positive. Anions are negative. A way to remember this is anion looks like the word onion. Onions make people cry. Onions could be a negative thing. So an anion is a negative ion. And an anion has actually gained an electron. So it has one more negative charge, or sometimes 2 or 3 more than the protons that it has. Last one is a hydrogen bond. A hydrogen bond is a weak chemical bond that forms between 2 polar molecules. It's also links molecules, not atoms. So that's the key thing. So within an atom, you're either going to have a covalent bond, ionic bond, or if we're talking about metals, a metallic bond. You're never going to have a hydrogen bond between just 2 elements. It's going to be between 2 molecules. And this has to do with polar molecules. So this is our last slide for today. So polar molecules are actually molecules that have an unequal area of charge. One of the attendance questions, I wanted you to look at this. So water has a slightly positive end, while oxygen has a slightly negative end. And this is important. And when next week, one of those days, when I post a video looking at the different properties of water, you're going to see what makes water polar. Okay, so that's it for today for this lesson. So let me know if you have any questions, and have a wonderful day. Bye.